Hey everybody, this second video is going to be on something that kind of was touched on in one of the videos I watched, where a guy by the name of Larkin Rose interviewed a local pastor of a church. And he was a pastor of a church that is not tax exempt. They don't fall under the 501(c)(3) tax code classification. And they don't believe that pastors should use that as an excuse to get filthy rich. But anyway, one of the points that he brought up was that a lot of Christians are taught to misunderstand Romans 13. And they cite that when they say, well, I can't be this and I can't be that because I have to obey government. Now, from my understanding of the Greek, this is a deliberate misinterpretation and a deliberate false teaching. And I'm going to explain why. The term that we derive from that scripture is the powers that be. And a lot of people have misused this title and assigned it to government or to powerful individuals, when that is really not the case. That title doesn't belong to them. And I'm going to explain why. And it's actually revealing this information is actually putting the ball back in the court of empowering the individual. Okay? Now, the root words that are found in that scripture in the Greek is hai, usai, exusai. And what that translates into directly is the existing powers. So if you want to take it in context, regardless of whether you think Paul wrote Romans or not, in the context, if you look at it back then, how can someone obey the existing powers when those powers did not exist back then? Well, that's the first clue that this doesn't talk about government. But the existing powers have always existed, as long as human beings have been on this planet. And what is that referring to? That's referring to your conscience. In the Old Testament, they didn't have a word for conscience. It was the heart. Anytime you see the word heart in the Old Testament, it refers to conscience. They say he had a good conscience, when they refer to heart. When Pharaoh was persecuting the Hebrews, the Israelites, it states that Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Well, you can substitute that word with conscience, and it would further expand the meaning of it, but it would probably be closer to the original intent. So, anyway, the powers that be does not refer to the government. It refers to your conscience. Your conscience has existed. It is ordained by God. We all have a conscience. We all know the difference between right and wrong. And what it actually says in Romans 13 is that let every soul submit himself to the authority of the existing powers. There is no power but of God. The powers that be, or the existing powers, are ordained of God. So what it's saying is that your conscience was ordained of God, and that you should listen to your conscience. Now, when your conscience is skewed or seared, as in the case of Pharaoh, you shut the conscience off. You harden it. Then you're not operating under the authority of your conscience anymore. You're operating under hate or some other concept that is harmful to others. But when you operate under the conscience, then you're operating with the intent to be at peace with others. And even Jesus asked the questions, why do you ignore your conscience? He didn't say it exactly that way. But let's see. We'll try to look it up real quick here. In Mark 2:8, and immediately Jesus perceived in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves and said to them, why do you question these things in your hearts? And he was using the Old Testament reference to conscience. And, well, let's put it into context here. Because what were they talking about in the previous verse? Okay. They were talking about healing the paralytic. Okay? And the big to-do was that Jesus was breaking the law according to the statutes that stated that no person could be healed on the Sabbath. But he did it anyway. So this makes Jesus a lawbreaker. Okay? Now, he was following a higher law, the law of the conscience, the common law. So his question to them was, why would you disregard your conscience as in goodwill towards others, regardless of what time of the week it is? Why would you want me to ignore this man and not act in goodwill towards him just because it's a certain day? In other words, he was placing his conscience, the higher law, above the man-made law, which was petty. And that was the basis for Romans 13. If you really want to be honest, that's the basis for Romans 13. In other words, some laws are not ordained of God. And when they violate the conscience, which is the higher law, then they are not laws. Thomas Jefferson spoke about this. Any law that becomes unjust is no law. So you can see all of these things are working in concert. All of these ideas are aligning perfectly. And I believe it's because they all come from the same place. So for any of you that still want to believe that Romans 13 is pointing you towards the government and saying that no matter what they mandate, whether it's in good conscience or not, I have to obey it, you're not fully grasping or understanding the principle behind it. The higher law is the conscience. This is something that we have been given to us. It's been bestowed on us. It's a part of our human makeup. And so in order for us to honor Romans 13, we have to honor our conscience. That's it. Hope you enjoyed this and it was informative. Thank you.